question is for now, and if you're still enjoying living, and you're still enjoying being a woman, and being sexy and being alive, then one wants, surely, to wear the clothes of today.
玛莉官时尚的革命者是由英国伦敦 V&A 博物馆策划。那从2019年在英国展览之后呢，就进行了国际的巡回。V&A 博物馆他们的馆藏有超过大概50万件。特别是在服装设计跟织品的这个部分，是他们非常重要而且专业的一个研究领域跟收藏展览的方向。这一次当然我们有机会可以制作玛莉官它的回顾展，当然也是基于时尚在整个设计产业里面，它不仅仅是一个流行消费的层次而已，它其实也跟整个文化的发展，甚至于跟历史的对话，而且它对于时代也产生了一个包括像性别等等的这样的一个革命。
Mary Quant grew up in quite an ordinary household, South London, quite suburban. Her parents were teachers and very hardworking, and they brought up their children to be diligent and academic and completely not to be designers or outrageous dressers in any way whatsoever. Very much dominated by the experience of living in wartime Britain. So they were evacuated to the country where they could have a little bit more freedom. Mary Quant always talked about how important that time was for her to sort of express herself and run about and enjoy her childhood. Mary Quant's style was built upon a solid foundation of the British fashion industry, which through the 20th century had become quite efficient and was built on a network of factories in different textile industries of Britain. There was amazing wool coming from Wales and from Yorkshire. There were factories which were becoming much more efficient because of the need to produce uniforms in the war. And there was also great marketing opportunities. We exported British products around the world, and I think that's the sort of background that really helped Mary Quant. As well as all these opportunities for young people to express themselves, the art schools were producing really talented people who wanted to express themselves. There was a real creative focus in London at the time, pulling in from students from across the UK. After she'd been to art school, she met some influential people, including her husband, and they were able to kind of tap into this culture of the art school, the actors that were living around there, these kind of more eccentric characters. And I think this very creative climate contributed to Mary Quant's designs she was able to come up with and sort of supported her ideas. Mary Quant, she admired the French designers and studied fashion. Chanel was a great role model for her as well. But she wanted to reflect the energy and the spirit of fashion on the street that she saw around her, to present a look that was humorous, it was fun, it was mini dresses that you could wear at work, but also go out in late at night as well and go dancing. I think the menswear inspired pieces from the early 60s are incredibly important and led to the development of the kind of very restrained, simple mini skirts. Using menswear fabrics, it was quite a subversive thing to do. So take tailoring fabrics using Savile Row. Her husband would have worn these very formal suits, but she made simple shift dresses. And by doing that, I think it used these kind of iconic, traditional British fabrics, but made them wearable for young women. She would call them very witty names. So Bank of England, you'll see in the exhibition, obviously showing this inspiration from these formal suits that businessmen wore to the city to do their daily jobs. Quant was always inspired by new modern materials. PVC was a fabric which had been developed particularly for Second World War flying and Navy uniforms also, which is a plasticized fabric. So it's very shiny, but you could get it in fabulous colours. So she borrowed from this menswear tradition and made really fun, practical raincoats when she collaborated with a traditional rainwear manufacturer in Manchester. And they successfully made the garments in larger numbers so they could be bought by people in the high street. They had these wonderful hats that, like Christopher Robin rain hats, and using these names from British traditions. Another important designs inspired by Victorian frills and this idea of borrowing from past traditions and subverting them and kind of creating something new and different. One in particular was called Miss Muffet. That immediately conveys that idea of, you know, a simple, childlike, frilly dress, but she's just uses the frills at the neck and at the cuffs, added to a very simple shift dress, which became iconic. But also it was made as a paper pattern that you could make at home as well. So you could personalize it, you could use cheaper fabric, you could use floral fabric. And I think that was one of the important step forwards. In 1964, this happened. Skirts were just about on the knee, but with a dress like Miss Muffet, you could shorten them very easily. And I think that's when the miniskirt moment really took off.
She put the Quant in quantity, and she put quality into ready-to-wear fashion. Mary Quant made her name by originality, and originality goes all the way through her new collection.
So Mary Quant's designs were part of that wider movement across culture in terms of music and art and fashion. And I think it was obviously the miniskirt that really, really expressed those changes in terms of women's liberation and being able to wear what you liked, maybe wearing trousers as well to work. It was a very new thing, which I think we find shocking today. Even a suit that was tailored a little bit like a man's suit, but flattered the woman's body. And these very simple miniskirts that expressed all these changes that were, and these opportunities that were coming in for women in the 60s in particular. Mary Quant always said was her own favourite was a jersey mini dress. She was inspired by this new fabric. It was a very dense jersey fabric, which was stretchy. She double-stitched the seams with contrasting stitching, a bit like jeans. So these were very basic, kind of easy-to-wear garments, often inspired by sportswear as well. And I think this was the kind of ultimate expression of her feminism. She often said that she was almost reluctant to grow up and sort of bear all the responsibilities of adult life. And the dresses like this kind of expressed that energy that she wanted to hang on to. And she resisted these very strict rules about femininity and what women should look like, what they should do, what kind of jobs they should do. So it was just hitting that moment when women were able to work more in more male-dominated areas, escaping the kind of domestic sphere, and wearing her jersey dresses. I think you get the perfect expression of that moment. The key thing in terms of the worldwide influence that Mary Quant had was this idea of licensing her designs. So it extended not only from fashion into clothes, into shoes and tights, cosmetics, and even later on into lifestyle. And I think the really clever thing was to develop a brand based on the Daisy logo. So not only was her name very memorable, very graphic, it looked good, but the Daisy logo meant there was this kind of recognizable emblem, like a badge that people wanted to identify with. And I think that meant that her brand was incredibly strong. I think she was the one who really broke the rules, really wanted people to wear the clothes that they wanted to wear that expressed their personalities. She presented it in a way like a kind of paint box of ideas. She said it was something for people to choose from and express themselves. And I think the way you see in fashion now, there's no one way to look. You know, women wear trousers, men wear skirts. It's kind of that whole story of how fashion can be really positive and liberating, and you can express yourself. And I think that's the essence of what she showed us.
玛莉官时尚革命者这个展览，其实很重要的是把时尚不仅视为一个流行的这个产业而已， 最重要的是它带出了好的时尚设计师关注的不只是服装本身的设计，而是它可以改变作为我们对于生活重新认识的一个态度。